Yeah, man, we're good. We're good with the PowerPoints.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining our virtual press briefing via the Jamaica Information Services website and social media platforms, and via STATIN's Facebook page. Today, our Director General, Ms. Carol Coy, will be highlighting key aspects of Jamaica's economic performance during the fourth quarter of 2020, as well as for the 2020 calendar year. In keeping with our advanced release calendar, Ms. Coy will also release the March 2021 Consumer Price Index and the January 2021 Labor Force Survey indicators. We will also release key findings from the COVID-19 module that was fielded in the January 2021 Labor Force Survey. Following Ms. Coy's presentation, we will take your questions and comments. For the Q&A session, Ms. Coy will be supported by the Deputy Director General, Ms. Leisha Dalati-Bodier. Please use the raised icon feature if you have a question or comment for the Q&A session. Without further delay, let me hand over to Ms. Carol Coy.
Thank you, Mrs. Garvey Green. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for joining STATIN's digital press conference. As was said, I will highlight aspects of Jamaica's economic performance during the fourth quarter 2020, as well as for the calendar year 2020, starting with the GDP for October to December 2020. During October to December 2020, the Jamaican economy continued to be negatively impacted by the spread of the novel coronavirus and the measures implemented locally and internationally to control its spread. Total value added declined by 8.3% relative to the corresponding quarter of 2019. And this was primarily due to the decline of 11.1% in the services industries. When compared to quarter 3 of 2020, however, the economy grew by 0.9%, and this was a continuation of what we saw when we had compared the third quarter with the second quarter of 2020. This would have happened because of the relaxation of some of the measures initiated since March 2020 to limit the spread of COVID-19. I will now discuss further the detail of the economy's performance for the fourth quarter relative to the comparable quarter in 2019. For the quarter being reviewed, declines were recorded in all services industries, except for the producers of government services, which grew by 0.2%. Activities in the services industries were negatively impacted by the COVID-19 containment measures and the decline in the global travel industry. The primary contributors to the decline in the services industries were hotels and restaurants, which declined by 53.8%, the wholesale, retail, trade, repairs, installation of machinery and equipment, which declined by 8.8%, the other services, and this includes the arts, recreation, and culture groups, which declined by 21.6%, and the transport, storage, and communication industry, which declined by 10.4%. Value added, however, in the goods producing industries grew by 0.2%, and this was mainly attributed to the increase in the output levels in construction, which went up by 6.3%, and mining and quarrying, which grew by 6.3%. However, we had declines in agriculture, forestry, and fishing and manufacturing of 7.2% and 0.4% respectively. The decline in agriculture was largely due to heavy rainfall in the months of October and November. We will now look at the preliminary estimates for the calendar year 2020, and this showed that the Jamaican economy declined by 9.9%, and again the decline largely reflects the impact of COVID-19 on the economy. The impact of the pandemic was most evident in the services industries, which saw value added declining by 11.8% during the 2020 calendar year. Tourist arrivals fell significantly during the year, with stopover arrivals to the island falling by 67.2%. And as we would remember, during the period March 21 to June 14, 2020, the island's sea and airports were closed to incoming visitors to limit the risk of imported COVID-19 cases. Curfews were also implemented to limit the movement within the country. This resulted in reduced opening hours for restaurants, bars, and wholesale and retail establishments. There was also a prohibition on the staging of entertainment activities, which negatively impacted the performance of the recreation, sporting, and entertainment group. A lower demand for both local and international transport services was also observed. Production fell in the goods-producing industries by 4.5%, with all the industries declining during the period. I will now turn to look at the international merchandise trade for the period January to December 2020. Total expenditure on imports for 2020 amounted to $4.7 billion US dollars, a decline of 26.4% when compared to 2019. This decline was largely attributed to lower imports of fuel and lubricants and raw materials and intermediate goods, which fell by 48.8% and 17.1% respectively. Imports of consumer goods also fell and declined by 14.2% when compared to 2019. Looking at exports, exports were valued at $1.2 billion US dollars. Relative to 2019, earnings from total exports declined by 26.4%. The decline in total exports was mainly influenced by a reduction in the exports of alumina, which fell by 39.8%, and mineral fuels, which fell by 36.1%. We will now turn to look at the March 2021 Consumer Price Index, and would have been explained, the CPI is due for release today based on our release calendar. Let me reemphasize that the CPI measures changes in the general prices, level of prices of consumer goods and services purchased by private household. The index does not reflect changes in individual consumer tastes and preferences or changes in the standard of living due to changes in income levels, and the CPI is the most widely used measure of inflation. In March 2021, the All Jamaica Consumer Price Index, which we refer to as the CPI, increased by 1.1%. The increase in the inflation rate was impacted by a 4.6% increase in the index for the Housing, Water, Electricity, Gas, and Other Fuels division. The index of the heaviest weighted division, Food and Non-Alcoholic Beverages, rose by 0.2%, while the index for the Transport division increased by 0.5%. The increase in the Housing, Water, Electricity, Gas, and Other Fuels division was primarily due to upward movements for the group's actual rentals for housing, which went up by 13.1%, and electricity, gas, and other fuels, which went up by 8.6%. These movements were, however, tempered by a decline of 1.8% in the index for the group water supply and miscellaneous services related to dwelling. For the fiscal year, which is April 2020 to March 2021, the inflation rate was 4.4%, and the point-to-point, which is comparing March 21 to March 2020, the inflation rate was 5.2%. When we look at the regional inflation rates, for the Greater Kingston metropolitan area, the inflation rate was 1.1%, and this was similar to the inflation rate in the rural areas, 1.1%. Other urban centers, however, the inflation rate was 1%. I will now turn to the January 2021 Labor Force Survey. Today we are releasing the January 2021 Labor Force Survey findings in keeping with our advanced release calendar. The Labor Force Survey is a quarterly survey that measures the number of persons employed, unemployed, and outside the labor force as at the reference week. Be reminded the labor force survey does not measure the number of jobs created. Persons are considered employed if they are engaged in economic activities for at least 1 hour during the reference week, which in this case was December 13 to 19, 2020. From the January 2021 labor force survey, it is estimated that 1,194,800 persons were in the employed labor force. This was 74,300 or 5.9% fewer persons when it's compared to the similar period in the previous year. The number of employed males went down by 4.9%, while the number of employed females declined by 40,200 or 6.9%. Looking at the employed labor force by industry group, for January 2021 labor force survey, the largest declines in the number of employed persons were observed in the following industry groups. Accommodation, food and service industries went down by 27,400. This was a 24.7% fall. In the industry, arts, entertainment, recreation, and other services, the employment fell by 18,800 or 14.5%. In the industry, wholesale, retail trade, repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles, there was 15,400 fewer persons employed, and this was a decline of 5.9%. However, we had an increase of employment in the construction industry, which went up by 7.2%. Looking at the employed labor force by occupation group, the number of persons employed declined in all occupation groups except for the group professionals, senior officials, and technicians. This group increased by 2,500 persons. This group represents high-skilled labor, which is typically associated with higher levels of education and training. The increase in this occupation group was due to the increase in the employment of males. The occupation group service workers, and shop and market sales workers had the largest decline in the number of persons employed. This decline was 12.9%, or a decline of 38,900 persons relative to the January 2020 labor force. Females accounted for the majority of this decline. The second largest decrease was found in the group craft and related workers, which fell by 14,700 or 9.3%. Males accounted for the majority of this decline. Turning now to unemployment. For the January 2021 labor force, there was an increase of 15.6% or 15,700 in the number of unemployed persons when compared to January 2020. The number of unemployed males was 53,600, and this was an increase of 23.5%. The number of unemployed females increased by 9.6%. The unemployment rate for January 2021 was 8.9%, and this was 1.5 percentage points higher than the rate of 7.3% that was recorded in January 2020. The unemployment rate increased for both males and females. The unemployment rate for males increased by 1.6 percentage points to 7.6%, while for females, the rate increased by 1.4 percentage points to 10.4%. Looking at youth unemployment, the unemployment rate for youth, and here we're talking about ages 14 to 24 years, was 22.8%, and this was 3.8 percentage points higher than that in January 2020. The unemployment rate for male youth was 19.6%, compared to 17.5% in January 2020. For females, the rate was 26.9% compared to 20.9% in the corresponding quarter of the previous year. Looking at outside the labor force, and here the number of persons classified as outside the labor force was 775,100 persons, and this was an increase of 8.1% when compared to January 2020. Now, the impact of COVID. Since the July labor force, STATIN has been fielding a module on its labor force survey to monitor the impact of COVID-19 on the labor market in Jamaica. Some of the findings were, when we look at households, a little over half of the households in Jamaica experienced a decrease in their income since March of 2020. So this is about 488,000 households. When we looked at the individuals, approximately 46.2% of employed persons indicated that since March 2020, they have experienced either a complete or a partial loss of income from employment. When we will now move on to persons who have indicated some loss of job, the total number of persons employed in January, approximately 22,600 or 1.9% of the employed labor force were absent from work during the reference week. And approximately 30% of these were absent because they were either temporarily laid off or absent due to COVID-19 related factors. Since the pandemic, work from home where possible has been one of the recommended measures to control the spread of virus. The survey found that 9.1% of total employed persons, which is about 109,100, spent at least one full day working from home or a similar location during the period. Of these persons, 55.2%, or about 60,300, were working from home due to social distance restrictions related to COVID-19. And of this number, 70.7% were actually in the occupational group: professionals, senior officials, and technicians. In closing, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the work of the management and staff of STATIN, and to thank the respondents who continue to take time out of their busy schedule to participate in our household and business surveys. We reiterate the need for continuous participation in our surveys. We also thank the respective ministries, departments, and agencies for making administrative records available for the compilation of these statistics. The public can rest assured that the information provided to STATIN is kept in the strictest confidence. The demand for data by policymakers to make informed decisions has increased significantly in light of the pandemic. While data collection has been impacted negatively due to the spread of the virus, STATIN continues to provide information to the government of Jamaica to enable effective planning and decision making. We continue to collect the required data while observing the established COVID-19 protocols. We are committed to keeping our staff safe as well as mitigate the risk to our respondents. We will continue to monitor the recommendations and guidelines established by the government and will adjust our operations accordingly. We also implore Jamaicans from all walks of life to play their part by adhering to the COVID-19 protocols set out by the Ministry of Health and Wellness, including the wearing of masks, maintaining physical distance, and frequently washing or sanitizing your hands. COVID-19 is still a clear and present danger. Let us all do our part to protect ourselves and each other. Thank you.
McCoy. We will now take your questions. Please use the raised icon feature if you have a question or comment. And when you're identified, please state the name of your organization that you're representing. Are there any questions?
Good morning, Andrew Laidley here from Television Jamaica.
Thank you, Andrew.
Wanted to find out, when you look at the COVID-19 module of the labor force data, are you seeing where, for example, persons who would have experienced a reduction in salary due to COVID from the previous survey, are we seeing where things are getting better, where less persons, for example, are experiencing that, or are we seeing where more persons are experiencing that when you put it all into context? So basically like a comparison between the module before and this particular one.
Thank you, Andrew. Dr. Natalie Simpson will provide the response to your question. She's the director of the surveys division. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So thank you very much for that question. So just to provide a little background for the labor force survey, typically we do comparisons between the current quarter and the same quarter of last year or the previous year. So for the labor force, we're comparing the January 2021 with the January 20. And at that time, we were not yet collecting information on COVID, obviously, because COVID was not yet an issue for us in Jamaica. So what I will say is that we don't encourage comparisons between, one quarter and the previous quarters. So we don't have that comparison at the moment.
But just a quick follow-up. I understand that you don't compare quarter to quarter, right? Mm-hmm. You do this on a point-to-point basis. Mm-hmm. But I'm trying to understand, right? And I wonder if we could get that from the data. I don't imagine that this would have been the first COVID-19 module on the labor force. I think I can recall one being done before. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if you could gather from that comparison whether things are improving or deteriorating.
So just to elaborate on something that I said as well, and you're right, we've been fielding the COVID module since July, which is the first labor force survey that we did since the pandemic. In addition to that fact, you will note that the labor force does not follow the same set of persons. And that is partly why we don't do the comparison like that. So you can't categorically say, for instance, that if 22,000 approximately persons are impacted this time, that is an increase or decrease over the previous quarter, because we would not be following the same persons. So that is one reason why we typically don't encourage, or we don't encourage that kind of comparison.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Simpson. I think we have a question from Stephen from the Gleaner. I think there's a question from Stephen from the Gleaner. All right. Okay, so Stephen's question is there a direct correlation between increase in violent crime with male unemployment? If so, does STATIN think that employers have traditionally opted to chop female workers and keep males on staff as means of reducing social ills?
Our surveys do not do that correlation, so it's not an issue that Statin could address from the labor force survey. You would have to do something targeting that specifically, but not from the information that we currently have that you could make that assumption.
Thanks, Ms. Coy. There is another question from, I think it's P. Warren. This person is asking, what are some of the factors driving the increase of rentals? I believe I heard 13.6%. Is there another question? We'll take, I think, 3 questions, and then I'll hand over to our Director General, Ms. Coy. Are there any other questions? All right, I think our Deputy Director General will respond to the rental question from P. Warren.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we are. I'm sorry, I think we have lost the audio from Ms. Delatibodier. Are there any other questions while we try and sort out the audio for Ms. Delatibodier? We can take another question.
Yes, Andrew Ladley here again. I have another question. I wonder if there is any data to indicate at this point the impact that COVID-19 has had on the orange economy, that's the creative industries as a whole.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Ms. Coy will respond.
Yes, Andrew, if you look at both the labor force and the GDP, in the labor force, the group arts, entertainment, and recreation, both in the GDP and in the labor force, have shown significant decline. So those are the 2 indicators that we have, and they have shown decline in both the employment levels and in the total value added. So production activities and as well as the labor market would have declined in that industry.
Thanks, Ms. Coy. Thanks, Ms. Coy. Still trying to sort out the audio for Ms. Delatibodier, but there's one question from Siobhan Campbell. And this question is, based on information provided, can Statin say if COVID-19 has widened the gap between the male and female employment, which had greatly narrowed before the pandemic hit? Dr. Simpson will respond to that question. One more question. Are there any other questions before Dr. Simpson comes on?
Georgia, I'm told to try again. Can you hear me?
I think our Deputy Director General is on.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So I was responding earlier about the changes in rent. What we have observed is that during the height of the pandemic, around the summer, what we saw was that there was a reduction in rent. And what we're seeing now is more of a return to the pre-pandemic levels in terms of the rents that are being charged now on the market. So that's what we're seeing right now. So if we compare what we're seeing now to the pre-pandemic levels, it's not that significant an increase. In fact, it's slightly lower than what it was before March 2020. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ms. Delatibodier. I'll now hand over to Dr. Simpson.
So I'm hoping I heard the question correctly. But just to say that before COVID, what we noticed in the labor force was that females were making gains, of course, in the employed labor force. And what we've been seeing since COVID is that the decline for males and females, it's somewhat similar. So as Ms. Coy would have reported earlier, the decline for males in terms of the unemployment rate is 1.6 percentage points, and for females 1.4 percentage points. What you might want to look at, though, is the different occupations and industries, because females are impacted differently from males and vice versa based on the industry. So I'll give you an example. Service workers and shop and market sales workers, the males in that group declined by 14,965 approximately, and for females it was 23,890. So if you look across industries, you'll see a differentiation in terms of the effect by sex, but in terms of the overall movement, you will see some similarities in the movement, which based on that, I can't categorically say at this moment that in the overall sense, females are more impacted.
Thanks, Dr. Simpson. So there is one more question from Stephen from the Gleaner. Does employment lead or follow GDP growth in Jamaica? And our Director General will respond. Sorry.
I'm not sure if I could say one follows the other, because what you are measuring is what is happening in the economy. As you would have seen, the labor force that we are reporting now was actually, the reference week was in December. The GDP would have been for the period October to December. So I'm not sure. What would happen is that you will see at the same time what is happening, because if the industry is falling, then what you will actually see is employment is falling. So I'm not sure if I could call one lead compared to the other. Okay. All right. So Andrew, that was his question. Okay. He hasn't. Oh, Andrew has a question. Andrew Laidley.
Yes, I do, Ms. Coy. It's actually just a clarification. I wanted to be certain of what I heard from Ms. Delatibodier with regard to the rents issue. Is it a case that I heard that rent cost has gone down this year compared to last year at this time, or is the case that it has increased? You were breaking up a bit, and I just want to be sure.
All right. I think what she was saying was that just after the pandemic levels, we saw some reduction in rents. And so the increase that we are seeing now is just rents going back to the pre-pandemic levels. That is what she was trying to explain.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so there are no more questions. Are there? Okay, so just wrapping up the key highlights of what I said, we would have said that total value added for the economy declined by 8.3% compared to the corresponding quarter in 2019. When we look at the annual GDP for 2020, the economy declined by 9.9%, and again, this was due to the services industries, which were the ones that were most impacted by the pandemic. When we looked at the CPI, the All Jamaica CPI for March 2021 increased by 1.1%, and it's the group housing, water, and electricity, which went up by 4.6%. The heavily weighted food and non-alcoholic beverages went up by 0.2%, and transport went up by 0.5%. When we look at the labor force, the main highlights that we will find for the labor force is that obviously the number of persons employed in the labor force declined. In the January 2021 survey, there was a 5.9% decline in the employed labor force compared to the January 2019. Male went down by 4.9%, and female employment went down by 6.9%. And again, the industries that you would have seen the impact from are the similar industries to what you had in the GDP, which is the accommodation and food services, the arts, entertainment and culture, wholesale and retail trade, and transport. When we look at the inflation rate, what we notice is that unemployment has gone up in the Jamaican economy. The unemployment rate for January 2021 is 8.9%, and this is 1.5 percentage points higher than January 2020. Unemployment rate for male 7.6%, and for female 10.4%. And youth unemployment has also gone up. And with regards to COVID, we are seeing where COVID is having some impact on the income of households. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Coy. Thank you for joining us via our social media live stream on JIS website and also on our Facebook page. We encourage you to visit our website, where we will be uploading all the data that we presented this morning. We also encourage you to visit our Facebook and Instagram page, where you will get regular updates when we have our release. You're also welcome to call our library and also to send us emails via info@statinja.gov.jm if you have any queries relating to any data that we presented today. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next press briefing. Thanks.